In a time of profound social and cultural change, an entire generation of young Americans stood united in their desire for more powerful cars, fueling the greatest horsepower war in automotive history. Screeching rubber through turns, roaring down back streets and country lanes, were fun-loving drivers in their wild and powerful dream machines. Just about anyone could afford to fly down the road in a boldly styled, attention-grabbing American icon, the muscle car. Hello, I'm Chip Foose, coming to you from the Marconi Automotive Museum in Tustin, California. The old adage, win on Sunday, sell on Monday, was never more important than during the heyday of the muscle car. High-performance automobile fans in the market for a new car had to look no farther than the fiercely competitive Grand National stock car races for inspiration. By the late 60s, stock car racing was learning to take advantage of aerodynamic principles. And soon, a few of these slippery homologation specials would be spotted on the street. Unlike today, the stock cars that competed on the track during the 60s were actual production-based muscle cars. NASCAR required manufacturers to build a minimum number of cars and make them available for sale to the public. The winning formula in 1969 was the result of a clever production design modification by Ford.
NASCAR really was watched, and everybody held their breath. They really wanted to see who won on Sunday, and it really did have an effect on showroom traffic the following day, and Ford didn't want to completely lose track of that. And so they built the Torino Talladega to go out and do battle, especially with the boys from Mopar, in the high-visibility NASCAR arena.
Named after NASCAR's Talladega Superspeedway track, the design of the 1969 Ford Talladega and sister car, the Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2, was based on the Fairlane 500, sports roof, two-door hardtop.
The Talladega is cool because of the way they designed it, because they've learned through wind tunnel testing that most all 60s and early 70s cars had concave frontal areas, and it just traps air and slows it down.
I remember going into the Torino studio and seeing a clay model of the Talladega, and it was all done for aerodynamics. The nose was a little longer, the grille was pulled out to the front, and it had a different roof line. It was pretty exciting to see a car that was done for real racing.
So they learned very quickly that if they flushed the grille and flushed the headlights and cleaned that area up, the car would be faster. I mean, radically faster, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 miles an hour faster. You can't make enough horsepower to overcome the aerodynamic drag. So the key is stop working on the horsepower, start working on the aerodynamics, and make the car cleaner, and consequently it would be faster with the same horsepower.
Engineers at Ford would seek a higher top speed by lowering the car's center of gravity and rolling the rocker panels under the body, reducing wind resistance. The race cars ran Ford's 427 or the Boss 429 engines, whereas the production cars ran the more streetable 428 Cobra Jet with C6 automatic transmission.
It's understated in its simplicity and should get more attention because of how rare it is and how dominant it was in '69, winning Daytona 500 and the Manufacturers' Championship. The cars came as a bare-bones car. This turned out to be a car for a purist because no power steering, no power brakes, and basically drives like a truck. I think it was rated at 335 horsepower, but they really underrated it because of insurance and other things. The new front bumper that they put on the Talladega was a rear bumper that was turned upside down and cut and modified to give a smaller surface area to the front of the car. Also distinguishing the car, on the doors above the handle, there's a T for Talladega. On the back, in the center, below the trunk lock, just the emblem. It's got a big T on it. And inside the door panels, The word Talladega is on both the driver's side and the passenger side. There's probably less than 200 Torino Talladegas out there now. There were originally 754, I believe.
Coming up, an aerodynamic Dodge Charger designed to beat Ford.
It's not that they weren't fast or good cars. They were considered by street racers to be too heavy to be competitive on the streets.
In 1968, Ford and its stable of top drivers were winning Grand National stock car races in Torinos and Mercury Cyclones. While its success didn't necessarily translate to muscle car class leading sales on the street, it motivated Ford's arch-rival Chrysler to look for an edge at the track. Adding fuel to Mopar fires was the news that the king, Richard Petty, announced he would leave Plymouth to drive Fords in the 1969 season. Dodge knew that their Charger needed better aerodynamics to beat Ford on the super speedways. In early 1969, Dodge introduced their new race car and street version, named the Charger 500. The 1969 Charger 500, named after the Daytona 500 race, was an evolutionary design of Dodge's standard Charger B body, double diamond, Coke bottle profile. The front of the 69 RT model featured a stylish full-width, speed-robbing, hidden headlight grille.
The easiest thing to use for the 500 was the 68 Dodge Coronet grille and headlight surrounds. By getting rid of that air pocket, extending the grille, it let that new Charger 500 not have this air pocket in the grille, but you had to add a front air dam, and that helped create a vacuum under the car. Because once air goes through the radiator, if there's air pressure under the car, it can't escape and your car runs hotter. So therefore, by creating a vacuum under it, you do two things. You let the air flow through the radiator and go under the car, and you create a downforce.
Dodge engineers discovered that the standard Charger's tunneled rear window caused turbulence and lift at speed. So they made a 22-degree rear window flush with the rest of the roofline to match the sail fins and a shorter trunk lid to reduce lift.
Not all of what they wanted, but quite a bit of its rear car lift. The average car loses 400 to 600 pounds of its own weight at 100 miles an hour.
Approximately 500 1969 Dodge Charger 500s were built, and an estimated 390 were delivered for street use. The engine of choice for racing was the 426 Hemi. Production Charger 500s were offered with a 440 Magnum or a 426 Street Hemi. This Hemi-powered example from the Wellborn Muscle Car Museum has the Torque Flight automatic transmission, black interior, bucket seats, and black stripes over white exterior paint, with color-matched steel wheels.
The Chargers were fairly heavy. It's not that they weren't fast or good cars. They were considered by street racers to be too heavy of an automobile to be competitive, on the streets. It's not to say you didn't see some of them. They were fast. They had great top ends, especially if they were geared properly. So I think its image was NASCAR more than it was stoplight to stoplight.
While it captured 18 racing victories in '69, the 500 body style just was not aerodynamic enough to beat Ford's 30 wins.
The Charger 500 didn't do what Chrysler wanted because you got to go back to the Talladega 2-inch rocker panel, and by lowering the body, Chrysler thought, okay, we're set. And they get there and the darn Fords outran them again.
Coming up, the most extreme Mopar of 1969.
I could just imagine some poor grandmother from Pasadena looking in her mirror and seeing this massive drop-nose, brightly lit colored vehicle coming up behind him, burbling.
The muscle car era's quest for ultimate performance was nearing its peak at the same time that the United States was declaring victory in the space race. By mid-1969, Chrysler's big block Hemi engines had proved their merit. But their race cars were just not fast enough for NASCAR's big super speedways. The Dodge brass figured that if NASA could send men to the moon, they could enlist aerospace engineer John Pointer to suggest ways to improve the aerodynamic design of their Charger.
They took it to Bob McCurry, and Bob's response was, God, that thing is ugly. Will it win races? And they said, yes, sir, it will.
Development began around aerodynamic shapes added to the front and rear of the Charger 500. The program would be named for NASCAR's Superspeedway in Daytona, Florida.
Chrysler's best racers were invited up to Detroit to take a look at what they were going to race in 1969. They uncovered the car in front of the racers and said, the new Dodge Daytona, the first Aero car, the first wing car.
Chrysler gave every team what is called a cookbook that told you what to do with every aspect of the Daytona, the wing angle, the springs, the torsion bars, the sway bar, your tire pressures.
The whole idea was, if you can clean the front end up and then keep that back end glued to the track, you can go fast. Easiest thing to do is to make the car smaller. Well, they couldn't really do that. They had those cars to race. So if you can't make it smaller, make it cleaner.
NASCAR's homologation rules in 1969 required Dodge to build 500 Charger Daytonas. Standard equipment included the 375 horsepower, 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, heavy-duty suspension, brakes, and TorqueFlite automatic transmission. The 4-speed manual was optional. Only an estimated 70 Charger Daytonas were delivered to the public with the optional 426 Hemi motor rated at 425 horsepower.
When Dodge came out with their wing car in '69, it looked like a spaceship had landed. You've got this huge nose, and there's nobody on the planet that can sit in one of these vehicles and see where the nose is. So you've got to be very careful parking the things, obviously.
I would go and test drive Daytonas when they were brand new, and the salesman would park it against a fence and hit the fence at the dealership, putting the car away. So there was all of these problems that developed after the cars were built that now we got to fix them again.
I could just imagine some poor grandmother from Pasadena looking in her mirror and seeing this massive drop nose, brightly lit colored vehicle coming up behind you, burbling. And then you had this huge wing in the back. You could hang your laundry on this thing. It was almost like a cartoon, a caricature of a vehicle, but you know what? It worked. And the car really stuck to the road or the racetrack, depending on its use.
When it came to race cars, you absolutely had to be functional. But those visual cues wound up on street cars. A lot of Aero kits do work on cars that are street performance cars. And that's where they got them, from the track. And you can feel them at 70, 80 miles an hour. You can feel the car squat down. So it's real.
The car handled great. If anything, it was so good because it was a zero lift car. You had right at 1,200 pounds downforce on the nose, and right at 600 could be produced from the wing. And the wing was nothing more than verticals with a aircraft wing inverted, if you think of it that way, where the low pressure is reversed and gave you down pressure on the track. It was way ahead of its time.
Halfway through the 1969 NASCAR season, Charger Daytona drivers Bobby Isaac and Richard Brickhouse would run laps at over 199 miles per hour at Talladega. But the speed of Dodge's Daytona would not be enough to overcome Ford's NASCAR points lead that year. The following year, in 1970, a new NASCAR milestone was reached by the Dodge Daytona.
And in effect, gave you your first 200-mile-an-hour car that was done at Talladega with Buddy Baker at the wheel.
The 200.447 miles per hour speed record would not be broken for 17 years. Still ahead, Plymouth gets its wings.
Was just a real surprise. Tall gear in the rear end, and the vehicle felt comfortable at stupid fast speeds.
David Pearson won the 1969 NASCAR Championship points race, and Richard Petty was second. Both men were driving Fords. Then Ford would end factory involvement in the 1970 NASCAR season. citing concerns about cost, fuel economy, and safety. Had the aerodynamically superior Dodge Daytonas influenced their decision? Perhaps. But Plymouth knew they would need a car capable of winning the championship to get Richard Petty back.
The president of Plymouth went to Level Cross, North Carolina, sat down with Richard and Lee Petty and said, what's it going to take to get you guys back into a Plymouth? He said, it's going to take a Plymouth wing car. And the Plymouth Superbird was born.
NASCAR changed the homologation rules in 1970. Instead of 500 cars, they would require manufacturers to build one car for every 2 dealerships. Plymouth would build an estimated 1,920 Superbirds based on their B-bodied Roadrunner. Dodge had used their B-body Charger for the Daytona the previous year. Like the Dodge, the Plymouth could be ordered with the 440, and 135 were delivered with the 426 Hemi. At a glance, the cars appear similar, but there are a few cues that set them apart.
The wings on the birds are laid back more. The bird nose has a body line in the middle of the nose. The Superbird's got a crease in the hood where it's an extension. The Plymouth has scooped quarter panels. The Daytona has them in the door.
The Charger had more thought and engineering in the design. The Superbird was more of a rush job because they had to get it ready for the NASCAR season, and Petty was biting at the bit to have his wing car ready for that season. That's why you see the roof line different, the elongated back of the birds different from the Daytona. And you notice on all Superbirds, they're all vinyl top because they elongated the rear section to get them homologulated quickly for NASCAR. And so they have a cut seam, and to cover up the seam, they all run vinyl tops.
While Plymouth Superbirds may have looked out of place on the street, they were just right on NASCAR's fastest tracks.
From a functionality standpoint for what they were intended to do, to go fast at the super speedways, it worked very, very well. If you think about the aerodynamic loads that are imposed on that wing at 200 miles an hour, what that did was that just pushed the car down into the track so that when it went into the corners, it would stick. And then the front end was just a matter of cleaning it up. It just moved the air either under the car or over the top of the car. And that was why the wing was so tall. But you had to have it tall enough so that it would bite into clean air and not the disrupted air that came off the roof.
I've gone across the desert in a 440 wing car doing about 160. Stable as can be. Closed road, don't try this at home. But it was just a real surprise. Tall gear in the rear end, and the vehicle felt comfortable at stupid fast speeds. Stick a 426 Hemi on there, lighten the vehicle, put Richard Petty behind the wheel, Katie barred the door.
I remember a friend of mine bought a 70 440 Superbird, and I laughed at it. I said, "You're going to drive and ride down the street in that?" They couldn't sell them. Who wanted one? You'd be laughed if you pulled up into a street race with one of those.
They made 1,920 of them. I happen to own number 1,920. It has not been restored. It's a numbers matching car. Everything is original on it. It's an Alpine white, bucket seat, console, shift, automatic. It is a 6-pack, 6-barrel car, 440 of course. This 6-pack gives you a little bit more on the top ends, but as soon as you get up to about 80 or so, the 6-pack kicks in and it'll pull away. You've got a 20-horse difference just by having a 6-pack on there. It only has 36,000 original miles on it. It runs great, and it's got Richard Petty's autograph on the back.
Petty Enterprises brought 2 Plymouth Superbirds to the 1970 Daytona 500. Rookie Pete Hamilton in the number 40, and Richard Petty in his number 43 car.
And here we have the king, and we have the rookie. And ironically, the rookie smoked everyone. He won the Daytona 500 in a brand new car under the Petty Enterprises flag, and that's what makes that such a special car. It's Pete Hamilton, the rookie, beat everybody. It's been restored by Petty Enterprises as the number 40 Pete Hamilton Superbird. And I'm very, very happy and proud to have been part of many people that had brought that car back to life. What happened with Superbirds in general is they were so fast, all wing cars were so fast, that in 1971, NASCAR had changed the rules that you could only run a 305 cubic inch in a wing car. So the aerodynamics no longer had an advantage.
I look at the wing cars as more novelty performance. They're a broader performance in a sense that they were built with an intent for one purpose: to win on Sunday in NASCAR. It's hard to pigeonhole them into a traditional muscle car. I think they go beyond that. Beyond that as far as their importance in that period and also their collectability. They're outrageous.
For just a few short years, drivers could barnstorm their favorite back roads in machines that looked more like an airplane than a car. Purpose-built for super speedway stock car racing, the Chrysler and Ford Aero cars are arguably the most extreme muscle cars in history. From the Marconi Automotive Museum in Tustin, California, I'm Chip Foose, and we'll see you next time on American Icon, the muscle car.